Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Lloyd Suh. I'm a new member of the playwriting faculty here. And the topic of this talk is, quote, things I've learned about character from actors I've known. And there's a secondary title that I think is important, which is, or would you write that character differently if you knew you'd have to perform it yourself in front of a bunch of strangers 8 times a week? And this is all stuff that I've never talked about like in this kind of a format in front of people before, so I'm like trying out new material. And I also think it's worth reading out loud the description I put together because it's like just to remind myself of the questions that I put out there, but also just to give us a context for what we're doing here. And it goes like this. This lecture isn't just for playwrights, but for anyone invested in writing characters of any kind. We'll play around with various possible answers to some of the most valuable questions actors tend to ask, from the practical, who am I talking to? What do I want? How can I get a laugh here? To the cosmic, what am I doing with my life? Should I accept this part? How can I play this part and retain a sense of dignity and personhood? The goal of the lecture will be to give us all a bunch of tools towards writing fuller, more complex, and more specific characters. And I'll say, like, you know, like, if there are any actors in here, you might be a little, you already know all this stuff. But I wanted to start with an anecdote, and this is something that was told to me by the late, great Romulus Linney, who I know was, spent a lot of time here in Sewanee and at the conference. I studied with him in graduate school. And the story is, I think I remember this correctly, like he knew a guy who was an actor in the original production of A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway, and he played the doctor. And if you know Streetcar, you might be like, is there a doctor in The Streetcar Named Desire? And there is, and he comes on, like barely, he comes on at the very end, like the last 60 seconds of the play, and like at the end of Streetcar, this is a spoiler alert, but like the doctor comes to take Blanche away, and this is the only thing the guy has to do in the whole play. He shows up and he has like 2 lines. He says something like, "It's okay, Blanche. It's gonna be okay, Blanche," and then he takes her away, and that's the whole part. And so this guy, that the other guy that Romulus Linney knew, told this story that he was like at a party with this guy, and somebody was like, "Hey, what are you doing these days?" He's like, "Oh, hey, I'm in the new Tennessee Williams play on Broadway." They're like, "Oh, what's it about?" And he says, "Well, you see, it's about this doctor." And so I mentioned this because it's kind of like, you know, it's ridiculous, but it's also like it's true, right? Because from that guy's perspective, you kind of have to, like from his perspective, if you're going to do that show 8 days a week, if you're going to, you know, do that, it has to be all about you. You can't do it otherwise. And like, it's a cool reminder that like, if you're gonna, like your job is in the show is the same as your job in your life. You're supposed to be the star of your own life, right? It has to be about you. And thinking about that, like, so if you're playing the doctor in Streetcar, you have to ask yourself the same questions that you ask yourself if you're playing Blanche, which are like, what do I want? And, in the doctor's case, it's simple. He wants Blanche to come with him. And for Blanche, you know, it's more complicated, but it's the same question. You know, you still have to answer the question. But you have to answer it for every scene. What do I want in the scene? How does it relate to what I want in life? And then you have to track it from scene to scene. Like, how am I doing? How close am I to getting what I want? What's in my way? And like, what kind of tactics am I using to try and get it? You know, when and how do I switch tactics, and maybe even more importantly, why do I want that, right? Which is another way of saying, what do I want out of life? And so, yeah, that's the fun part. So that's, so let's do that. And because I think that while, you know, that's all an actor's job, but I also think that it's kind of my job, you know, as the writer, not necessarily to answer the questions explicitly, because a good character is, you know, open to interpretation and could be played a multitude of ways. So an actor should be allowed to answer those questions in their own way. But I think that, like, I take very seriously the writer's responsibility to give just enough information to make it interesting for the actor, for crafting and structuring the storytelling to make them worth pursuing, and to, you know, make it juicy and dramatic and fun, but also to leave enough out so that the actor can personalize, because when the actor can personalize, when the actor brings to what you've done their own their psychology, their imagination, their emotional life, it's just like, it's double. It's like, or more than double. It's just so additive. And it's better, and it's fuller, and it's realer, and that's not just true of the theater. Like if you're reading reading anything of any genre, like those moments when you as the reader bring like your baggage, your junk, your history and your emotional stuff, that's the stuff, right? That's when you're like really connecting. When you're connecting as a reader, that's your goal as a writer, right? So in other words, like if I think about it this way, if I'm playing a writer in a play, then that's my goal, is to find that. That's the what do I want, is to get to that alchemy. So in terms of how to get it, obviously there's no simple formula, but so the way I'm going to frame this is like through tactics. I have some tactics here. So tactics I've learned from actors about writing characters. Tactic number one, I just call broadly preparation. It's like this particular way that an actor prepares, which is not, part of it is rehearsing and memorizing all those lines and all that stuff in choreography, but it's also about defining and like deciding what you need to play the part. So if like you need to learn an accent, that's part of the prep. If you need to, like if you're playing a tennis player, you should maybe learn a little tennis, and if you're like playing a character from a particular point in history, then you learn a little bit about that era in history. And so knowing that actors are going to do that kind of work, it's like, I'm going to be in the rehearsal room with them. I want to kind of know how to talk to them. Like I want to do that. I feel like I have to do that work too. So their prep should be similar to my prep. And so thinking about how an actor is going to prep helps me imagine how to prepare myself to write a scene and then how to write the play. Because like my favorite thing that I've learned from watching actors that they do is like they do this thing after they've done that work, and then they've memorized the lines and they practice the accent and everything. And then, but once they're in the scene, they just abandon it. They just forget about it. And they say, they let it go. And it's an amazing thing that they can do this, but they have to do it because they have to, like when they're in the scene, they can't be thinking about the mechanics of an accent or like, the research that they've done. They can't be in their head. They got to be reacting and responding to what's happening with their scene partner, what's happening in the room, the energy, the audience, all that stuff, so they can react instinctively and subconsciously. And so I try to, like, I really get a lot out of it, and I enjoy trying to emulate that as a writer, to do like that prep, to think about, okay, what am I trying to do? What's the situation? Where is it in this, in the broader story? Do all that prep work so that when I'm writing the thing, I'm ready and I can abandon it and just start like responding almost involuntarily, impulsively. And I find that's a lot easier when I emulate an actor's preparation. And that starts with articulating a goal, an objective, to help guide me, but then it's also about, like, once I'm in it, I'm responding organically. And not just responding organically, it's like, I had a teacher once tell me, the way you write a play is you like map out all of it, you plan everything, you have it all in your head, everything you can possibly prep for, and then once you sit down to write, under no circumstances are you allowed to follow that plan, which is a way of saying, like, okay, have something to guide you, so when you're lost, you have a direction to go, but actively look for ways to disrupt that, to have, to find new discoveries and seek those out. So, okay, tactic 2. Actors, they talk a lot about stakes, right? Like what's at stake, and raise the stakes in language like this. And this is related to what I said above about wanting a thing. But the thing about that is it's not about, it almost doesn't matter what you want as much as it matters the intensity with which you want it. Why do you want it, right? So like if you have a bunch of characters who are fighting over a bag of money, and one character is like starving and poor, and another character is a millionaire, obviously the drama and the juice is with the character who has the most intense need. So actors know this, and they want it. So, which is not to say that they're always big, like some actors are bigger and some actors are more subtle, but it's like, no matter how they express it, they want the emotions to be big and the motivations to be big, even if they're expressed subtly. So you'll hear actors talk about the strongest choice. What's the strong? Well, this is what's a stronger choice? And when an actor says that, what they usually mean is the most dramatic choice. So knowing that an actor will gravitate toward the stronger choice, I like to ask myself and check in with myself as to whether I'm making the strongest choices dramatically too. And for a bunch of writers who were in workshop with me, I know I've said this multiple times, so forgive me for saying it again, but these are questions I always ask myself. The first questions I ask myself after I've written something and I'm looking at it is like, what's the highest point and can it be higher? And what's the lowest point and can it be lower? And that's kind of stuff that I stole from actors. They'll finish a scene and they'll be like, how did I go? Where was the top? Where was the bottom? That's how they analyze it. And that's always been like one of the quickest and most effective ways of just deciphering what to do next for me. Tactic 3 is, again, related to objective. I don't know if this is really a tactic. Maybe it's just kind of a fun fact. But I find this interesting that you can't play a negative objective. And I think this is really cool. This is the thing that actors say. Like when you articulate what is your goal in the scene, you can't say, like, my goal is to not do this, or my goal is to stop this. It has to be aspirational. And I think this is kind of amazing, right? It's only playable if you're thinking about it in positive language. So like if you're saying, like if a scene is about a person trying to stop a runaway bus from like running into a building, you can't say my goal is to stop the bus. You have to say my goal is to save the building. Like you have to visualize the outcome as opposed to focus on the negative part of it. So stopping the bus might be a tactic, but the goal is to save the building, and that's a subtle difference. But the reason I love it is because it's like the aspirational part of it. I think it says something about humanity, like that. Like if you articulate saving the building, why do you want to save the building? You want to save the building because everyone you love is in that building, and if you save the building, then you save the day, and then you're a hero, and that validates your existence, and then you will finally be enough. And that, I think, when you think about it in those terms, it just feels more positive. And here's the tactic 4, which is, okay, I don't know, this probably isn't a tactic. It's a sidebar. I've disrupted the structure of the thing that I laid out for myself. But hopefully this works because I'm just, reacting to this other impulse, which is like the question of how do I get a laugh here? I know this seems like minor and technical, but I think it's really important because similarly, it's like the question of why do you want a laugh? And to answer that question is also kind of to answer the question, like the question I asked before of this thing of like, should I take this part? And the answer to both of these questions is kind of, I think it's rooted in what is the impact? Because I think about, like for most actors, at least the actors that are like in my peer group, I don't know a lot of like fancy celebrity actors who can do whatever they want. I'm not counting them, but for most actors, it's hard to turn down work. So the question of should I take this part, it becomes an employment question and a financial question and all that stuff. But it's also, the beautiful thing that I've noticed is when confronted with something that, I've seen actors do this where they're confronted with a thing and they're trying to decide, whether to do something that doesn't quite line up with their vision of what they want to do as an artist or what they want to put out in the world. I've seen actors do this thing where they'll look at it and they'll say, okay, it's not on the page, but I think I can bring it. I think I can bring it, I think I can deepen it and find ways to make it into into something that I can do, right? And I think that that's aspirational too, and I love that it's aspirational, it's goal-oriented, and it's active. And it's about trying to bring the thing to you, and as much as it's about to bring yourself to the thing. And that's related to another thing that actors do, that I've heard actors say, that is a tactic, which is don't judge the character. And in practice, this doesn't just mean like an actor saying this character is bad, or this character is good, or mean, or dumb, or something like that, or any of those judgy words. But the reason that people tell actors not to judge the character is that when you assign somebody like a thing like that, then it disallows it almost disallows the possibility that they'll change or surprise you. And when you cut off that kind of possibility, I think you've lost something about humanity. So if an actor is playing a character who makes a lot of really dumb choices, then instead of saying, hey, this character is really dumb, then I think a good actor will say, this is interesting. Like, what kind of circumstances would have to be in place in my life to make it seem like these are the best choices available to me? And that's an exercise in empathy. And this is what actors do. This kind of empathy is essential to that craft. And so as a writer, sometimes you get lost in the big picture and wrapped up in thinking about the big picture that you start thinking about the specifics and the minutia. Sometimes you do that. You're like, this is the mean character, this is the dumb character. And I think that it helps to remind myself that I'm going to ask somebody to memorize a whole bunch of words that I've written and stand up in front of a bunch of strangers in the dark and do this, and actively mine for this character's humanity. And so, like as writers, we know this, right? You do your most raw and vulnerable work when you feel safe. It's hard to do your most raw and most vulnerable work when you can't share that with people that you don't trust, right? It's hard to do that. And if you're an actor, it's your job to do raw, vulnerable work. And so as a writer, you're only going to get that if you create those conditions, if you put them in a position where they're going to feel safe to do that work. And so it helps me as a writer to honor that and to try to help them do that. And on that note, I think that last question that I'm how can I play this part and retain a sense of dignity and personhood? That question presupposes that the actor is confronted with the prospect of playing a character who might conflict with that actor's worldview. And what to do about problematic characters or a problematic story. And sometimes the answer is don't do it. You should turn it down. And sometimes the answer is the thing I said before about saying I can try to make this better. But it's hard to turn down work, and it's hard to control something. Control how a character is received. So. This has come up a lot, and I can't really talk about what I've learned from actors without talking about this, because of all the questions that I'm asked in life by peers, by writers, not just early career writers, but all writers, is the question about what am I allowed to write? What, right? About cultural appropriation, about cultural representation, authentic representation. And the way I look at this what I've learned about actors and how I relate to this is that it's not just a political question. Of course, it's a political question, but it's it's even more importantly, it's a craft question, at least from the part that I can control. And it's definitely a craft question to the actor. As I said, unless something is completely egregious, most actors will err on the side of taking it apart and trying to make it work for them, to wring out whatever sense of authenticity and humanity they can from a character. So as writers, I think that we have to do that too. We have to try and find that humanity and authenticity of each character that we try to put into the world. And that takes a lot of work sometimes. And to fail it but it's worth it, because to fail at that is to not just fail like on the level of a social responsibility, but it's a failure of craft. So like to that question, like this broad question of like, what am I allowed to write about? What am I allowed to, when and how can I write outside of my direct lived experience? I know people can get very defensive about this, but I think that, we want to say, we can write about whatever we want. And, I think maybe that's true, but if it helps, and this is key, like the thing that helps for me is to think about the actor. It's like I can write whatever I want as long as I can look an actor in the eye and say, yeah, you should memorize all these lines and then stand up and do this and make this your life for the next 8+ weeks, and not get paid very much. And if I feel like I can do that to an actor, then that's the bar for me, and that seems like like the appropriate bar for that kind of thing. Related to that, I would say, like, I know I never really answered the question before of like, how do I get a laugh here? And so I'll say, this is, I promise it's related, but this is like one of my favorite things I've learned from actors is the question, like you ask, why do you want to laugh? And if you start to think about why do you want to laugh, it's because the same reason they want you to cry, the same reason, like they want you to laugh, they want you to cry because they want you to feel something, and they want you to feel something because they want to have an impact, and it's the same thing that we're doing. They want to do the same thing we're doing, right? Which is that we want to matter, and we want the things we put out in the world to somehow matter. So when an actor stands up in front of a bunch of strangers, and when they search for the humanity of a character, that is an expression of wanting to matter, and when they hear a laugh, when they get that laugh, it's a signal that they do matter. And reminding myself of all that stuff just makes me feel like a better writer. And it makes me want to find, with actors and with everybody else, with audiences, with like readers, where those laughs are, where that aspiration leads, and where, whatever humanity we can find, where all of that takes us. I didn't really time this, so I realized I'm a little short, even though we started late. So I'm happy to, that's kind of all I got. But I'm happy to, I know folks are feeling a little bit of fatigue, conference fatigue and timing. So I'm happy, if folks want to go, that's totally fine. But I'd love to stick around, and if folks want to talk more or have any questions or anything like that, I'll hang out too. But thank you so much.